Hello there, this is Abhivardhan from Juristicity and I Global Podcasts, and here we have the second episode of Juristicity, in which we discuss about tech, law, and also how they intersect. Um, I believe certainly that when we have these discussions surrounding tech governance and the sustainability behind, the ideas which surround emerging tech and disruptive tech, we need to understand how tech really works in the industry. And before going to legal perspectives, we have decided that let's go on to have more technological perspectives. And I would also say social technical perspectives to discuss. Like in the first episode, we have had Bogdan, who actually is working in Affinity as the CEO, who had discussed about AI hype and how technological hype affects developed countries and also is coming up to developing countries. Now, in this episode, we have a quite interesting guest. Um, he is Shivam Vahia. He is an ex-journalist. He is also a product manager in a fintech company. Much of a tech geek, in my view, has apt knowledge, in my view, of what is the tech landscape in India, in policy, industry, per se. So, Shivam, welcome to the podcast, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is actually the second podcast I'm doing. I've just always tried to avoid them.
Sure. So let's start the discussion with a very simple question. When we talk about the tech landscape in India, there are many facets to it, and sector by sector, it is becoming diverse now. Before it wasn't that much. So when we look at the tech landscape per se, we know that there is a wholesome problem when it comes to the economic situation in the United States and Europe due to the
Right.
ongoing conflict out there in Eastern Europe and Russia. So, considering that, we saw a trend that various stocks of technology companies, from edtech to many, they were affected by the so-called recession, which is still technically being decided by, you know, the financial institutions in the U.S., for example. So, how do you look at the current tech landscape of India in a sense, whether it is floating, whether it is faring well, or what do you think about it? So,
So I'll go with a two-pronged approach for this question. First of all, let's just say that there are two kind of industries existing in the tech space. One is a purely service-based one, which India has been excelling for quite a few decades now. And the second one would be a more of a product-based model, where we're currently seeing a lot of fintech companies and edtech companies coming up. So, and even at the same time, we also have a whole bunch of SaaS companies which are doing some great work and even challenging the big tech, so called. So the way I see it is that product-based companies had actually started getting too overvalued after COVID, because there was this sudden surge of everyone thinking that, hey, the future is digital, so why not double down, triple down on it as much as possible. And even if you look at, like you just said, the stocks, if you just look at the profit to equity ratio of quite a lot of companies, especially US based or even some of them in India, it's just not believable that there's any value left in investing in them. So my answer to this would be India is currently at a quite comfortable position, simply because the exports that we do, which is basically IT services, are still climbing. And even if you look at a lot of American, European companies, which are the clients of our Indian companies, they are very crystal clear in their vision that despite the lower capital expenditure that they have, there will not really be any dip in money being invested in the overall IT infrastructure. I mean, very simply put, that just means that we might not see a transparent phone anytime soon, because there's not much money left. But that definitely does mean that back-end systems, like your banking systems, your supply chain systems, every single bit of IT stack that is required to run our day-to-day lives, that is where I do not see a downturn anytime soon. So I would say India is quite well cushioned in that form, that since we are just exporting out, it's a very good deal for us. Secondly, coming to the product part, you may have seen in the last 1 to 2 years that venture funding private equity funding. A lot of it has come to India. We had what 50 plus unicorn startups, even maybe even 100. I'm sorry, I'm not too sharp with the number over there, but the point remains that it's a huge long list. And if you look at it, some of them have a sustainable model, some of them don't, some of them are struggling. But it's too early to comment on the product side because we are literally just getting started. I mean, 2 3 years ago it was a very nascent stage. So I think we might see a small downturn on the product side, but it will not be as major as it is in the Western countries.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And uh, it's too early to comment on the case of how these unicorns will grow, what kind of products they will come up with. Some of them are trying to be good at distribution, some of them are creating a new ecosystem for their own customers. So there's an economy of scale question, and all of those things, turn around. So that's something which we have to look forward to. Now, when we look at, you mentioned about SaaS, and SaaS is a quite
Right,
emerging, I would say, industry, it's a sub industry, and it's a component of it. Even technology lawyers are much interested in SaaS because uh, they have to draft a lot, they have to help the
right,
particular companies to develop their particular services which are compatible enough. And uh, this is an emerging area within digital technologies which will flourish in India. And considering this this very irony, which is true, that we are not going to see, uh, you know, so for example, I mean, you might be very aware of the metaverse, and you
right,
might know how has Meta been handling with it since the decline of the NFTs due to the crash
right,
that Bitcoin had. And we know this, that because of that, we are still seeing that there's a concept called land, which is like having a digital property, kind of like a real
right.
estate thing within the metaverse, which is what Meta and many companies, even in Switzerland and parts of Europe, they're trying to do that, despite the fall of the cryptocurrencies for some time. So they have searched. I mean, according to a quite important crypto geek, Balaji Srinivasan, we know that he talks about the network state and all. This concept very quite interesting. I like them, and uh, well, they can be debated and discussed accordingly. But yeah, so once we on this is for sure that we are not there in a case where we are innovating too much as India. But yes, we are first becoming resourceful in what we have to do, which is the import export game. So this is a quite interesting thing to know. Now, I have a question on uh, the union government's approach towards digital tech and the tech landscape. Now, we know that the government is very cooperative in ensuring that these new unicorns, blossom, they come up, and investments regularly come to India. That's where we see a sense of clarity by the union government in many ways. The one thing which, however, interests me is the Niti Aayog's approach towards technology policy. After all, now that has certain appreciable aspects, and that has certain other interesting aspects. So, I mean, we saw the departure of a prominent personality who actually has been the CEO of Niti Aayog, Mr. Khan. So, when we, because even I have been understanding their AI approach, and their approach towards EVs and other particular technologies. Now, on AI, at least, I think that they
Right,
are correct on examining the problems in the current ecosystem of the North Atlantic as to how Americans, Canadians, Europeans think about AI ethics. But maybe we have to wait till the Digital India Act comes in, because there are two legislations which must be coming up in the maybe the coming sessions of the Parliament, which is first
right,
the data protection law again,
right,
and this one, which is the Digital India Act. I think TCS and some other big companies which provide services are actually in discussion on the draft. So, what do you think about, let's say, the Niti Aayog's vision? Because they more focus on policy, they advise the government, and they have a quite important role to play. Do you think their tech landscape approach has been evolving, or do we think that it's, I don't want to use the term, but let's say it's a bit of a stagflation for them. I don't know. So, what do you think?
Um, for me, the answer is actually quite clear. So you can actually, I can give you a very good comparison right now of two very different approaches going in two very different directions, and two of them having very, very different outcomes on ground level. All right. So first, I'll give you the example of how proactive RBI has been. I mean, in terms of policy, India's fintech is 20 years ahead of the world average today simply because RBI has been extremely proactive and down to earth in making its policies. By down to earth, I simply mean that they have constantly been in touch with stakeholders. They have on ground level, on a very personal one to one level, they've understood from industry experts that what is going on in the industry, what will happen, what can happen, and what can we do. Now, obviously, this is how any analysis for a policy is done. But the only difference is that today, after like 10 years of working on the UPI stack, we actually have something solid in our hands right now. I mean, for the last 5, 7 years, we have been using UPI. The next big thing, account aggregators, is going to come on board, which means that slowly credit bureaus will not be the only one offering data. There will be more alternate data available out there for lending, and not just lending, but a whole lot of other stuff. Now, on the other hands, if you look at Niti Aayog's approach, I do not see anything substantial or practical happening in that side. Now, even if you talk about technology, India is too chaos of a country to even consider AI or ML driven cars. I mean, we have to be practical in what our immediate challenges are. And in that case, I don't think Niti Aayog is even near the point that they're supposed to be. Secondly, it's all fun and how do I put it? I don't want to piss off anyone in the industry. Please don't come after me. But the way I see Niti Aayog operating is just giving out blank statements that, hey, by 2030 India will be here, by 2040 India will be here, by 2050 everyone will will have an EV. But there is no ground level proof, approach, or even start to even give us any confidence that, hey, this will happen. And let me just say it very bluntly, if they were so serious about working on India's tech landscape, the first thing they would have fast tracked is the data protection bill, which has been gathering dust for a very long time, a very long time. And we've now reached a joke where IT Act is what, 20 plus years old. It is impossible to govern the internet, which changes every microsecond with a legal, how do I put it technically, with a law that is 20 years old. Oh God! And there was enough pressure on them when GDPR happened, when Europe EU went with GDPR. That was an excellent start. I mean, I literally thought that, hey, if GDPR is coming up, then okay, let's say next 2, 3 years we should be doing fine. And as we stand today, we still have nothing. We still have fintechs leaking data left, right, and center. They just randomly pop up on the dark net, and it's just available for download to everyone. So many companies are still getting away with vulnerabilities, despite having massive leaks. They do not even report it to certain. It's just leave aside reporting to certain. If a journalist asks them what is happening, what is out there, they'll just give you a very nice, sweet, and simple answer. There was no hack. I mean, if you actually look at it, what policy are you making which can't be enforced? And to enforce a policy, you first need to make it into a law. So just putting out white papers, black papers, gray papers, or any kind of paper out there in a PDF format doesn't mean anything.
In fact, I sometimes think that they're creating a lot of policy literatures for MPP people who want to pursue policy careers, but you know, it doesn't make sense if it cannot be materialized or at least made
Exactly.
possible for any industry. And um, that's where I find Niti's approach quite disappointing. So,
I can actually even give you one more example. But in the end of 2021 or the beginning of 2022, Niti Aayog came up with a white paper on digital banks, fully digital banks. And they had basically proposed that, hey, why RBI should basically start giving out a only fully digital banking license to companies, and how fintech is the next big thing. But if you actually look at the granular data about India's banking system, you'll realize that it is so heavily dependent on business correspondence, the DSAs, the third parties who are involved in the process of signing up people. And that is for a reason. There is a huge learning curve that us, the so-called white collars sitting in an air-conditioned office, will never understand. I mean, for us, it's as easy as just downloading an app, putting an OTP, just giving our PAN card details, and hey, we're good to go. But try explaining that to the half of the population which quite literally lives in rural India. And that is where you have to realize that yes, digital is the future, but jumping directly over there just because it sounds fancy seems to be a very ignorant approach.
And this is something was which is a case for any new technology or any new technology service which we will see, because I mean, I can now very safely say that at least when it comes to financial inclusion from a digital angle, we have seen a humongous development, which is the UPI revolution,
Right.
in my opinion.
I'm so sorry to
Yeah,
cut you off. I
yeah.
just think right now, the last 3 minutes of the video clip, I sound like some politician who had once said that Indians cannot use UPI.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but I think if we even look at this aspect of making technology, you know, much inclusive in the sense that people get it and understand how it makes possible things. I guess in the rural areas, it's a big challenge for sure. When it comes to
Let me
urban
just
and
add one
semi-urban,
last bit to this. So, when I say
sure,
there's
please.
something wrong in going fully digital, I don't mean that it will not work out. I'm 100% sure in the next 5 to 10 years it will work out. My point is that right now we already have a lot of players who are trying to have a fully digital experience. There's Jupiter, there's Fee, there's already so many companies doing this out there. So, tell me something, if there is the private sector already putting in so much effort in going digital, and banks are also so actively investing in going digital, then why is there a need for a wholly new digital license? Is all I'm saying. I'm not against digital. I'm against the approach of trying to complicate things by removing more and more and more licenses. I mean, do we require a license to use UPI? Do the banks have to go for a license or something like that? I mean, I know there are regulatory compliance requirements, but it's not a license per se. And there's a very huge difference when you say, okay, hey, let's float a new license. A new license is just a entry barrier, and a policy should be aimed at reducing the entry barriers and going with a better approach that ensures protection, security, and integrity, but also makes the process easier for everyone to adopt.
And that's a very thing which people would appreciate, simply because we have had the license loss problem for a long time, right? I mean,
Right.
I remember this very weird thing when I think it was issued by the RBI, or it was issued by SEBI, maybe. I don't remember exactly which regulatory body, but there was a thing when you have to post a particular job on LinkedIn or something, you have to give certain OTPs or something like that regularly, and there was some complicated process around. I think that is not happening right now. But I'm just like, even within a significant, very simple thing like this,
Right.
things can be complicated out. I mean, it could
Right.
happen
Right.
with even corporate affairs work or even taxation. But I mean, we all know when the IT returns have to be filed, people have problems with the income tax of India.
Right.
So, it's like, okay, so let's move on to a sense of, and I want to know, how do you see it from your own perspective when you are in the field itself, let's say in the industry? So, I will get back on the union government again, but this is a little bit
Okay.
about professions and how
You
people
you
are
really don't
working on
want people to talk to me from the government, really, don't you? Not that they didn't talk to me, but you really are reducing my chances in the future.
it. So, we'll focus on specific things, but yeah. So, let us say from a perspective of profession, technology, while is becoming a big buzz in India, and it will become, technology law is also becoming an important profession, whereas we are saying that people who are not within the confines of your traditional litigation and courts, but also in
Right.
other ways, they are coming up and helping technology startups and companies. I myself know that even your Web3 companies like Polygon and whatnot, they are also endorsing
Mhm.
certain kinds of people who are professionals in the legal field. When you look at technology per se, digital technology or any technology which is emerging in India, and when you see that people who are in the legal profession, I don't know, I'm not sure if you have met them or not. I'm just asking. Do you think that there's something which legal professionals may need to do better to be well versed with technology law? Because there's a very simple problem. So I'll give you a simple example. You must have heard of, this hyped trend in developed countries about the idea of having IP rights, which are given to AI technology. Like I've literally written an article on this explaining why it's
Right,
not possible. It doesn't require a research paper. It's just common sense
right,
that it has certain algorithms. The algorithms are not human alike. They can't be compared to, I don't know, some billion neurons in our brain. You just can't even actualize that. It takes years to do that if you read the history of psychology and mind, right? So, I mean, that's one example. But the idea is when ethical ideas are given to legal thinkers and legal professionals when they approach such industry issues, because
they
even
tend to
when
forget
we,
the
yeah,
technical bits and the actual building blocks. I mean, since they
exactly,
can't understand it, so it becomes for very difficult for them to decipher and actually put it in legal terms or legal sense.
exactly.
That's actually a fairly easy question because I'll add a example to this also. So when you work for a fintech company, you should be having good control over finance and technology. Now, you either can be an engineer or you can be a hardcore finance person who's either a CA or a CFA or someone who's working with underwriting and credit. But there is also a fine line which, for a product manager, requires me to understand both of it. And this is a very similar scenario for tech lawyers in the future. For them to understand tech, you will require some in-depth knowledge, and I wouldn't say you'd require an engineering degree for it, but at least some basic understanding of how a software stack basically works. I mean, there's machine code involved. Over that, you have your BIOS or your Unix running, and on top of that, you have your operating system. So this was a very toned down stack that I've just explained. But my primary point being you have to understand how things, how data, how these bits work. Only then will you be able to actually, make legal opinions or make legal sense out of it. Now, let me give you a very simple example, something that has just recently happened in India. The Indian government recently said that, hey, VPNs are not allowed, and if you want to operate them, then you have to be open to sharing data with the government. Now, this obviously is sounds reasonable from a legal point of view. I mean, come on, what if tomorrow there's an incident and the government requires that essential data to catch the culprits? I totally get it. But from a technology point of view, my primary question is it's impossible. It is practically impossible for the government to crack down on VPNs. What is a VPN? It's nothing but a virtual corridor that exists between two nodes, which is encrypted just to ensure that no third party is able to enter it. Now, when the government said that, hey, this is my take on VPN, I was so personally offended that I created my own personal VPN and I use it every day. And the only reason why I made that was to show the government a middle finger that, hey, boss, I am not sharing my data with you.
I mean, that journey itself has been, weird. I mean, you're
So
talking about
you got
VPN.
my
Yeah,
point over here, right? Ki the
yeah.
law, the policy was made that, hey, let's crack down on VPNs. Nobody told the government it's not technically possible. You cannot crack down on VPNs. It's not humanly
Exactly.
possible. You may have the most powerful bot from the future, which is like 50 years later. It's like a super AI kind of a thing in such a supercomputer in such a small microchip, but it still won't be able to stop VPNs.
Yes, certainly. And I think there, like for example, I remember this when the IT rules came up with respect to regulating OTTs and media platforms, right? The concept of intermediaries in the IT Act. I think it was Section
Right.
79 or something. Yeah. Now, there was a very interesting analysis with somebody. I can't recall the article, but the analysis was that, and as you mentioned, I think in the beginning of the discussion, that we make laws which sometimes do not make the direct sense or the optimal sense. and then
Mm-hmm.
when we can't even implement them, they become they become like in a breakdown situation. They can't be even made actual, and even justifying them anywhere, whether in a court of law or through agreements, becomes not possible. And that was the reason why
Right.
the data law was actually withdrawn. But then I have one last question, because I think we are maybe near the conclusion.
Right.
This is about two aspects, and I would like to have your attention on that. So, one is that you definitely have a sense of understanding of certain industrial technologies, and I'm not talking about digital tech now, which are related to defense and urban needs, which is to say starting with metro and starting
Right.
with other kinds of technologies. Now, when it comes to industrial development, we see that state by state commitment is needed. Like, for example, in Uttar Pradesh, we see a sense of development, which is
Mm.
quite interesting. It's happening in collaboration with Delhi NCR, and something is happening up between the union and the state. And every state has its own story. Every UT has
Right.
its own story. Quite
Right.
interestingly. Yeah, so Bengaluru won't do the same as Chandigarh, therefore Lucknow won't do the same as Mumbai, and so on. Now, how do you look at the consistency of efforts in this regard? Because the concern which I generally see is that we try to start up very well, and we do in certain cases. But the one thing which I see, at least, and this is a disclaimer I'm giving in this question, that one thing I see, that at least there's a sense that, yeah, the government has the intent to do so in some aspects. That at least it tries to reflect, the state tries to reflect, the administration tries to reflect it. But when it comes to doing up and charting out the pathways, we sometimes miss a lot. So, how do
Right.
you look at it? Yeah,
I'm sorry, I can't give you a very in-depth answer for this. One case study that I would like to pick up is FASTag. I mean, it was so vehemently and insanely pushed by Delhi on all the states and all the highways that, adopt FASTag. And it's a good thing, actually. It's a wonderful thing. But if you look at it on ground, I'm in Maharashtra. So my experience in Maharashtra has been that all NHAI operated toll booths are smooth. Usually they do not have long lines. But the moment you go to a MSRDC operated toll booth, oh God, it's a mess. It's a genuine mess. The entire tech stack just doesn't work the way it's supposed to. In fact, in at least Mumbai, we've reached a point where they've stopped attaching those scanners on the top in a one stable position, and they've just got rods with the scanner on the top of it because they know the top wala thing is never going to work. We'll just have to randomly manually go and scan. So obviously there are 100 reasons for this particular tech not working, and obviously the local environment, the local operations, and everything matters. But the point for the end citizen still remains that policies developed by the central government tend to have slightly better implementation than depending on the state government to do it. And quite honestly, I do not see a solution to this in the near future. I simply do not. I hate to say this, but there's so much petty politics involved in our country that even if I try to add some technical depth to it, it's just not going to go above some politician's ego.
definitely. Yeah. Anyways, I think it was a delightful session. I think some quick insights were provided, and it was a pleasure to have you. Would be happy to host you again. And let's
Sure,
see.
sure, sure.
I mean, definitely. So, with this, we end the session of Juristicity, and I thank the viewers and the listeners who have heard us. You'll find VLA and even iGlobal podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and even on YouTube. So, stay tuned as we come up with a new episode for Juristicity. And thank you. Namaste.
Thank you for having me, by the way.
Certainly my pleasure. Certainly my pleasure.
And if someone's offended with my views, please just abuse in the comment section and forget about it. Happens to all of us.
Sure, definitely. That would be appreciated by heart. So definitely, definitely.